Hey, Desmond Du here from No Sleep Creative. Today I'd like to share with you a panel that my friends and I organized to discuss about how the pandemic is affecting the state of work and education. Our goal is to alleviate any fears, worries, or concern that everyone has right now, especially for the students, regarding the volatile future. In this recording, listen to the perspective of current students, a recent graduate, working alumni on how we're making best of this situation. This session is moderated by John Colette, Professor of Motion Media Design. With that, let us first introduce our current students.
Hi, I'm Krista Coates. I'm going into my senior year at SCAD. I'm currently interning at Block and Tackle, a studio in New York. And then I'm going to be co-president with Anna of Momi Love this year.
Hey guys, I'm Anna. I'm based in Maryland right now, but I'm interning with Meister remotely. Like Krista said, I'm going to be a co-president for Momi Love next year. And I'm super excited to do that with her. Yeah, and I'm a senior at SCAD.
Is it me? Is it my turn?
Yes, Will. Yes,
Okay.
Will.
Hey everyone, my name's Will. I just graduated this past spring, and I just finished my first week of work at Buck, and I'm currently based in North Carolina.
Hey guys, my name is Marcelo. I graduated SCAD last summer, Momi alumni. I'm working right now full-time animator at Trollback in New York. And yeah.
Hey everybody, I'm Peter Clark. I graduated in 2014 and I'm a freelance animator, designer, sound designer, whatever. And I've been working in San Francisco for about 6 years now.
Yeah, and I'm Desmond Du, currently working at Warner Media Studio and in Atlanta. All right, John.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just taking down some details. I guess I'm going to throw this over to Peter because I know he's got time pressures in terms of making it off to actually do work and get work done.
Gotta ship my drive.
Yeah, Peter, just this last little period. One of the things people are concerned about, particularly people who are in school, with the big change in circumstance, how this will affect their working careers. And for people who've just sort of crossed that threshold, it's not as clear how that's changed because it's like, well, this is what I kind of emerged into. But you're a good person to talk about this because, you've, like you say, you've been working for 6 years. How has it changed your work and what are the sort of pressures that it's put on you in the last little period?
Well, since I've been freelancing, I haven't actually gone into a studio space in I think 2 years now. So in terms of my workspace and how I interact with people, it really hasn't changed much. But what I have noticed is anything involving cinematography or live action production, all that stuff kind of came to a halt. The plus side to that is it seems like there's more digital advertising, like they're hiring more people to do animation work because they can't film. But a lot of these companies still want to get the ads out there. So even though it's kind of a scary time thinking about work, I think there's still plenty of stuff going around. So
you're speaking mostly of commercials production in that context.
Yeah, commercial production. So yeah, for me, it hasn't changed too dramatically. I've actually gotten a few projects since I do mostly practical effects. Like I just bought a new camera so I can work from home with that. And I've had a few jobs come in that were originally designed for whole teams to film, and they just downscaled it for like a single person like me to work on. So there's actually work that's come in because of COVID and all that.
Two follow-ups to that. I mean, obviously what we might call tabletop work, the industry can sort of over-determine that in terms of crew sizes. Like you can have 12 people on set. mostly in support roles, but the people really, if the shoot's fairly contained, like it might be stop motion or something like that, the shoot can be. Would that be fair to say that the essential personnel are fairly limited?
Oh yeah. Like a lot of the stuff I film is so small. Like I'm doing product stuff right now, and I just bought a humongous circular mirror and a Lazy Susan, and I've been setting up LED lights in my room, and just it looks like it was shot on a big stage with like professional lights, but since it's a very small product, you can shoot it in a closet and it would still look professional. So it definitely helps to start building your at-home setup if that kind of work interests you now.
And I guess following on from that, do you think this might be a little bit of a shift in terms of people's thinking about where they can or how they can facilitate work in the future? There's a sort of comfort in advertising to having a big crew on set, because you sort of want to be like, where's our money being spent? And it's like, oh, we've got all these people here, right? This is very professional.
Yeah, the clients love to come on set and sit in the little director's chairs and watch the chaos unfold. So yeah, it's definitely different when they can only pop on a Zoom and chat with you. And
I'm going to say that years ago, I filmed a CEO of a company to do a Christmas message to send to one of their interstate offices. And they said, can you just film this for us? I said, sure. So I just came into the office and set up, and he came in, he said, where are all the people? I said, I'm sorry? And he said, where are your hangers on? And I said, well, Rick, you can pay for them and they can be here, but they're not going to show up on screen. So I thought I'd just shoot this and we get on with it. He's like, good. And I worked consistently for the next 8 years for that company. Like a lot of money, but he was like, okay, that makes sense. So I think that's an interesting, I don't think it's going to go away, but it's certainly an interesting shift in the dynamic.
Yeah.
Marcelo, working for Trollback, how's that, what's the shift for you in terms of the...
Well, certainly very interesting. I like to work around people and my peers and my friends and all that. So I've never really worked from home before. But it's been pretty seamless, at least for me. Like the company really did a good job in transitioning to that. And so far it's been good. I built my own setup at home for a little bit. And so far so good. I know a lot of employees at Trollback, they're not all in New York. They're places in North Carolina and Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So yeah, it's pretty seamless, pretty nice. It's hard to get motivated sometimes, of course, because you're not surrounded by people. And I know that when I was at Trollback, working there in the office, I would look to my left and my right and see what people are working on and get a little bit inspired what they're doing and just constantly ask questions. It's a little bit harder working from home, but Slack is there and you can still talk to people. It's just not as, I think, accessible. But so far it's been a seamless transition.
Interesting. I'm going to go back to Peter on that, because Peter, you're obviously not, are you using Slack and tools like that as a kind of freelance director?
I used it on a pitch recently for like the first time in a year. For some reason, I was never on Slack much, but yeah, it's a really good tool. I remember I did an Oddfellows job last year, I think, or the year before. It was like a Nike Battle Force thing, and that Slack channel was so much fun. Like, just I don't know, it was pretty close to being in a studio environment, just everybody giving feedback and just throwing jokes back and forth, like posting work in progress. And maybe it's because it was such a like hands-on project where everyone was experimenting, but it was a very like tactile, like immediate environment versus
so that's kind of brought you into some of those environments, in a sense, given you point of presence, where as a freelancer, someone making your own way as a director, that's I guess it's a way of temporarily, at least, being with people that you're working with remotely.
Yeah, it makes it feel less serious than emails,
Yeah.
emails can seem a lot harsher than they're intended to be when clients give feedback and all that. So having like a chat where you can kind of talk through things, it makes it feel more like a conversation, which is very helpful when you've just been in your room in your own space, you know.
Yeah, no, it's nice to, it's sort of like almost like there's that intensity and then you open back up and have this kind of sociability. It's good to go between. Marcelo, for you, has that been the feeling that you've been able to maintain some of that office?
Yeah, definitely. Like we have in the office, we have like rows of like animators and designers. And for example, I have a chat with my own row and we talk about random things. And we also have like happy hours every Thursday. So we still get to see each other and talk to each other during the week.
And so do you sit there with a drink and just kind of?
Yeah, and just chat and hang around. Yeah.
It's nice.
So the office environment is still there, which is really nice.
So one question, has Zoom kind of risen up as a bit of a tool for all of you?
Yeah, I guess so. Like for example, well, we use Zoom for our happy hours. I don't really get much more on there,
Okay.
but yeah.
Yeah, and for someone in the current school situation, obviously having to do the last quarter a lot of Zoom, how did you find that transition? And Will, you can probably speak to this as well.
It was surprising that a lot of professors for me just like kind of did their own thing. I took a full load of classes, but only one professor actually did Zoom lectures. And he was very well prepared. It was like a lecture class, and the whole time he was just presenting, there wasn't a lot of feedback between student and professor. But my other classes were formatted to be online classes, like the traditional kind. So you didn't even have that face-to-face, I guess, communication. It was just like the information's there for you to read on your own time. And we did a lot of feedback through like Blackboard and posting your work. So I at least got to get feedback from my peers that way.
It's a bit different though, isn't it? It's like it feels a little flat, like you've just got to get this short written summary. Will and Krista, was finishing up that last quarter. Any thoughts on that from your point of view and using Zoom as a tool, or how it changed your?
There's parts of it that I really liked, and then other parts where I thought like Slack and just writing is like the way to go. Like it was very situational. I think stuff like what we were able to do with Shaw before he left, like that wouldn't have happened had Zoom not been a thing to get, people from all over the country. So like in those cases, or even something like we're doing right now, Zoom is like great. Classes where the teacher was having to lecture, I thought Zoom worked really well. But then other classes where it would be critique, where typically the teacher would go person to person. And then in class, you would be able to work while then that teacher went to each person individually. And then you just talk to them for about 20 minutes or so and then get back to working. Whereas in Zoom, that then translates to having to sit in on every conversation that's going on in class, which there is good things when it comes time to like critique and feedback. But then when there's like side conversations going on,
yeah, it's interesting.
It's like, it's adding more time into it makes class feel longer, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's like, I see pros and cons to using both. I think using both is like the way to go. It doesn't really work as just doing one or the other.
Krista, your experience from the classroom side?
I feel like I had a similar experience to Will and what he said with like, I had one class that worked very well because it was more of like, if we were actually in person, it would have been a lecture that had, where he was addressing the entire class. But in one of my other classes where it is more one-on-one, I missed that, like getting to, and I think the thing I miss the most is seeing like everyone's reactions in critique, and their real, genuine reaction to, whereas, on Blackboard or like, oh yeah, that's cool. Or like, you don't want to speak up too much or over everybody else in the video because, ultimately in Zoom, only one person can talk at a time, where like in class, there would be a lot of separate conversations happening. So that was definitely a big like transition, I feel, but like Will said, it's kind of, it works sometimes and it doesn't in others. And I mean, I think we are like lucky to have so many different technology platforms that like allow us to do this in a way that isn't so hard or so different from it at least simulates the experience we would get. But yeah,
I
definitely
feel it
miss
would be
seeing
harder if we're
people.
doing bronze slip cast sculpture. You know,
Yeah, of course. I mean,
or ceramics.
there are some really cool ways though that like school, like I mean, even your projection class is one example of like one way that, you know, you at when you first think of the class and like, oh, how students aren't going to be able to do that from home, but like some places are like finding ways to let the students do it from home. I think that's really cool. My boyfriend is he goes to Mass College of Art for industrial design, and he was taking a jewelry class, and they sent a kit with like wax models and other things to use that like, or materials that they could make a small model chair out of for his furniture class. Like, I think people are finding ways to get around the like non-physical part of everything.
Right. I mean, we're lucky because our medium is naturally modulated. If
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Peter's doing a lot of physical work, but it's still going to come. He's delivering a drive. You know, that's what's going to happen at the end of the day. So we're in this natively in this sort of environment. Just you're interning at the moment?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes.
How's that working out?
It's going really well. It's obviously really scary at first, and like I think the weirdest feeling was having the same like nervousness of like, you know, when you're commuting in on your first day and like walking around and seeing the building for the first time, like having that same like nervousness, but instead you're just like sitting in your bedroom waiting for your first day. Like I think that was a very weird experience.
Right.
But everyone at Block and Tackle has been so friendly and welcoming, and like being able to help in ways that I didn't think they could help. Like
Interesting.
just because, you know, I was like, there's no way they're going to be able to show me physically how to do this thing from over Zoom or like through Slack. And I've been like very pleasantly surprised at how many times I've been stuck, and I like shyly send a message in Slack of like, please help me with this. And they've just, whether it's like sending screenshots and screen sharing while they're, you know, going step by step through things. So it's been really helpful.
That's super cool. Will, I'm going to throw to you because you've got obviously got like what do you say, a week at Buck under your
Yeah,
belt. How's that
basically.
going? Like, this is not even an internship. This is like,
Yeah, this is full time too, so it's a little weird. There's parts of it I'm actually kind of comfortable with because all of my internships in the past have had some sort of remote work. 'Cause when I was at Gentleman Scholar, a lot of the projects they had me on were I was in the New York office, but they were LA jobs.
right.
So most of that communication with project leads was only through Slack or phone calls. And then when I did my internship at Meister, that was all remote. So everything I've done so far has kind of been in this formula anyways. What's different this time is starting remote and not really knowing too many people. I'll only really know who messaged me, and that's about it. So I'm sure in the office the place would feel massive, and I'd be like, oh, look at all these people I don't know.
But you've
But
got this little
because
team cluster around you.
yeah, but since I have like only a few names in my Slack channel, people direct messaging me and only talking to the people I'm on projects with, it feels way more compact, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, look, one of the interesting things for me, and I think about this from a very macro level, is over my career, I've gone from actually using physical media to originate work to working out how to get things to move between computers and physical media, like scanning film and film recording, because something has to be integrated into a film. So it's like, how do we do that? And there's, you have to use a special film recorder, and it's this whole thing. There's still a reliance on the physical media. And even delivering things to clients, if you're doing corporate work, sometimes you might give them DVDs, 600 or 800 DVDs to distribute with a piece of communications. And I noticed about 12 years ago that it kind of started to tip towards online, and it was becoming much more flexible in that environment. And then it got to a point where I didn't deliver a piece of physical media at all. And one job, I had a merchant and investment bank in Melbourne, and I was in Sydney, and they said, we need to interview this guy in Houston, and he's the expert on this thing. So I had a cinematographer who I'd used before in Texas, all remotely. We just worked together. Emailed him. He said, yeah, because I pay him straight away. Like I would pay him the second I got the media. And he was like, you just paid me, man. I'm like, yeah. He's like, great. So whenever I get on the email to him, he'd be like, yeah, sure, what do you need? Because he knew he was going to get his money real fast. So I got him to shoot this for me, send me the rushes, cut them, send me the main pieces of it, and then literally finish putting that together the night before they needed it in Melbourne, send them a file, which they used in a presentation. They got the contract for this huge $1 billion development. But that's, that to me seemed to be like so much faster than the old way would have been to put a crew on a plane and go and see this guy. The networks are so much more open. And I'm going to throw this to everyone. Have you, Peter, you're probably the best example of this, but are you finding that you're working with people from outside the company who are remote, like freelancers who are remote?
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of other remote freelancers. Like pretty much everyone that was at the studio I first started at here, when it shut down, pretty much everybody went freelance for the most part. So most of the San Francisco-based motion designers are all working from home and have their own personal setup. Like Chris Bajer is a great example. His work's amazing, and he's like pretty much always worked from home. And he works with mostly LA based studios, even though he's here in the Bay. So I think that's super common to be working remotely. Like G-Monk just recently did a project that is probably coming out later this month, but he was directing a team in Italy. Yes. And he was like on a Zoom, like one of those they had him on like an iPad on stage, and he was like talking about how crazy he was. He's like, yeah, there was like a 30-second delay on everything. And, I was trying to scream at them to change stuff, but like most of them didn't even speak English. So a guy had to translate my delayed thing. And, so it's kind of crazy seeing how remote things have gotten now. But it's also very inspiring, that those jobs can still happen.
I mean, Krista and Anna, you brought this up a little bit, the whole idea of we've got these different technology platforms. And I think from the educational point of view, do you think it's a little different to the work point of view? Do you know what I mean? Like when we're trying to do something educationally, it's a much more open process than going, we need to get this piece of work done.
For me, I feel like it's actually very opposite. Like Block and Tackle's communication has been very casual, and like even though we're getting work done, you feel like you can like speak freely about if you see something wrong, or like, and people are still posting like funny things that they see, or like it's still very much a friendly and like casual environment. Whereas I feel like when I'm posting in Blackboard, it's all for a grade, and it feels less like genuine sometimes, or like if you have to fit a word count or whatever, like it doesn't feel as like organic and genuine sometimes when it's through Blackboard versus like Slack.
I mean, that's a good point. It is a very different sort of, it's almost like this artificial set of constraints. Whereas
it's like trying to prepare you for those scenarios in a way, but it's also like not, you can't simulate how like that organic stuff happens.
No, I agree with that. I feel that the education is much more open in terms of what it is meant to do, but Blackboard's very much, this week you will learn this and you'll have this outcome at the end of the week, and it's very like, oh really? I don't know, I feel you guys all learn things really differently. Has anyone, Anna, have you got any thoughts on that in terms of just the student experience?
Yeah, well, some of my favorite like experiences in person is the fact that, you know, I can ask a professor like, hey, I'm kind of curious about this particular method or this thing. Can you do a lesson on it? And usually they're able to adapt and at least show us something about it, introduce us. Whereas, like you were saying, on Blackboard, everything is very prepared, very like set in stone. And about openness also, my favorite thing about learning is that I can feel free to ask the questions that I need to ask to, you know, get where I'm trying to go. But there's something about typing out, you know, a really simple question that just blows up the proportion of it, I guess. I'm trying to get over that and still ask the questions that I need to ask, but sometimes like verbalizing it that way and typing it out makes it feel like a much bigger deal than it really is.
Blackboard's awful. Sorry. I don't love it at all. But you know, it's like there's that personal thing. Even if it's over Zoom, you kind of feel like I don't know. I could send Marcelo an email, but I feel more like seeing him is much more like, oh, there he is. You know, I don't know. It's something about the look and the feel of people.
Like Anna was saying too, like if you were to just go up to somebody's desk, like at your, if you're an intern and you just go up to somebody and ask them for help on something, and you do it multiple times in the day, it's not that big of a deal. But to like, when you can see like the history of your messages with this person as like, and you just ask them like 2 hours ago, this little question and this little question and this little question, it seems bigger, like she said, like when it's really not. There's just something about that, like transferring it to text, that's like kind of scary.
Yeah. With that said, is there something that people feel has been they can't get with this shift to everything being mediated? Is there something we can't do or something that's just not working? And I think probably, you know, Peter or Marcelo, Desmond, Will, you know, work in the workplace. Will, your experience is like quite immediate, but for all of you, there's something to bring there. Is there something we can't do in this mediated environment that you just feel is not working?
I can't think of anything. I don't know if.
So yeah, it's a really hard question. I remember I had to get on a job for 3D, and then I have a MacBook Pro laptop. I was like, I don't think I can do this, guys. But they were like, oh, you can just remote into our work computer and use Redshift there. I was like, okay. So I don't know. That was very surprising to me because for me, I just couldn't do it, but easily fixed. I could just log into the computer, remote in, and use Redshift there, and it was pretty
like
seamless.
just with a screen.
Yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of the things that we do can be mediated pretty well. Sorry. So yeah, I can't think of anything right now.
Desmond, what about you from that kickoff?
So, I mean, some problem that I face in this remote situation is that even though the company loaned me like a company laptop, our workflow is that we remote into our workstation in the office, and it works fine seamlessly. But for the past 2 days, it suddenly stopped connecting. We do have engineering support where we call and just say, "Can you check?" But the past 2 days, no one has fixed it, so I can't work for 2 days. So next week is going to be hell for me.
Yeah. So that's all technical stuff. Given that there's a difference, there's a quality of difference. What does that come down to for you in terms of, and this is to everyone, what is that quality of difference that if we miss something, what might we miss in this environment?
I think for me, I miss. I guess you're trying to say what do we miss in the workplace? Is that it?
Look, everyone has sort of said, I can find information, I can discuss jobs with people, I can manage the process, I can update myself, I can even create some degree of conviviality with Slack. But what is it that we miss not being in the workplace or together? Or can we just do this from now on forever?
I think you're missing that studio culture, because right now, like I'm at Buck, but because I started remote, I don't know what the company culture is. Currently my company culture is getting messages to pop up on the screen telling me what to do, versus like there's a definite culture at GS or a definite culture at Meister. And I feel like without that, without knowing what the atmosphere is like, or like even Marcelo at Trollback, that probably has a very specific culture to it compared to the mill. If you don't have that, then it's just like messages from beyond telling you, coming into your computer, telling you what you have to do and what to do.
Yeah. Where did
I
I
feel like
start work?
Hmm?
Where did I start work?
Yeah. So I feel like that's probably the biggest thing that's missing right now, what most people miss the most. And I feel like part of that is kind of a necessity to keep it, this kind of stuff going.
Peter, is there anything you could say to that? Because clearly you work a lot without people in the immediate vicinity.
Yeah, it's I mean, the biggest thing I miss about like when I was at a studio, um, it's just like the energy of being around other people that have their own personal projects and things they're working on. Like being at Autofuss after hours was the best because like half the studio would hang out and work on their own stuff. And I love doing personal projects. So seeing other people work on their stuff would just get me even more motivated to work on my own. Or, I'd see someone using a software that I had never seen before and just start asking questions. And I think there's like a serendipity to it where like when you're just doing Zoom calls with people, no one's like just screen sharing and you see like some random thing they're working on. It's kind of like you have to be in a studio and kind of like just, walk around and see what's happening. And yeah, that was a big part for me just because I love to do stuff outside of commercial work to keep myself sane. And, I think it's same with being on set is like very stressful, but also so energizing and inspiring. You're like in it, doing late hours with like 10 to 20 people that are all just like trying to get this thing done. And like you all start going kind of crazy by the end. And like you can't get that experience working remotely. And there are like directors like G Monk, he's like such a high energy person and he's so different in person when you work with him versus like on Zoom, so it's definitely, you miss a lot of the energy and like the community, like Will was saying. It's nice to be able to just walk over and see people motivated to make their own stuff, and hard to get that when you're on your own, unless you're like constantly messaging people like, hey, what are you making? What's your cool side project right now? Like send me some inspo, which
so let me propose something else. Imagine we could set this up that you had something like a co-working space that you went to, but is it possible that like again you could be in some sort of space where there are other people working around you, but you might be working on different things?
Oh yeah, that's my my dream studio I want to set up at some point. It's like it's not an actual studio space where one person owns it and everybody works for that. It's like a co-working, like a bunch of freelancers that all have somewhat similar styles, all just share tools, bring our cameras, computers, everything to the space, chip in on the rent for it. And then, I mean, there's already like a group of freelancers where we all recommend each other or like try and bring each other onto jobs. So I think
of course,
if you like put all of us in the same space, it would just turn into like that same team is just always working together. And then you get the experience of a studio without, having to deal with all the paperwork of owning a studio, which every time I always love to talk to studio owners and just see what their lives are like. Cause it's very interesting because they all start as like, a flame artist or like, they all start where we are, but then you see where they are now. And it's like, so many client meetings, so much paperwork, and like, they're obviously really happy that they can create a space to support a bunch of other artists and like let them do what they love. But I also see a lot of studio owners that get so excited when they get that brief moment to go on set and be involved in the shoot, or like they get to give feedback on a project because, in their heart, that's what they want to do. But all the like owning the space and like hiring people and dealing with the politics of a studio kind of takes them away. So freelancer shared space would be really amazing.
So is it something we can learn about this from this last 6 months that might, and this is again an open question to everyone, is there something that you would take away and say this was a real positive, and this is something, I mean, people's experience of college was varied, for instance, because college wasn't ready in some ways to immediately do what it did. And so there was a transition period, but some people kind of thrived in that different environment. And I'm going to say it doesn't suit everyone, but it really suited some people. How could we take something from this period and take it into the next? The actual space of the college kind of dematerialized a little bit. Is there some way that you could have some part of that space, but maybe like a hub and spoke kind of way of organizing things, or a studio that you went to 2 days a week? Or, has this got people thinking about those questions? Like the flexibility between one place and another, how you manage your work, how much you want to be managed by space, and how much you want to be managed by project. That's a big question, but it's about what the means and the ends are, and how much, because the studio does tend to define spatially where you are. Oh, I'm going to go here to do this. Does this open up the possibility that we could be 70-30 or 30-70 or some other mixture? I mean, to some extent, Peter, you've already answered that in some ways, but to the other people who've, Marcelo, you've gone through this transition. Will, would you like to see that? Krista, would it be nice to be on at Block and Tackle 2 days a week, maybe? Or Desmond, could you get your work done by being at Warner, in and out a bit,
I think a lot of people. Oh, you go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Marcelo. So at first, when the work from home thing started, everyone was kind of resistant to it. But then things became like normalized. We realized that we can work actually off a laptop, work from home seamlessly, and people really enjoy that. Especially the people at Warner Media Studios. Most of them are like family people, so they have kids, they have dogs. They actually love it. They actually just love being at home with their children, and they advocate for like flexible, working days. Like you can work from home 2 days, and then 3 days you're in the studio.
And that might be, you see, that could be something which actually becomes introduced culturally?
Yeah, I think most likely. I think we're getting more, I think, everyone's getting more comfortable and confident that they can work in any part of the world. So this is going to change the way we work in the future.
Yeah, Marcelo?
Yeah, I think for me, it depends very much on like the people. Like half of our studio have their family and half of them are pretty young, and like some people want to go back to the studio because you get inspiration from your peers and your colleagues, and you go to the kitchen and you talk or gossip a little bit before you go back to work or whatever, and it's really nice. But other people also want to stay at home with their families, and they're realizing that it's possible. Everyone's working pretty well together, so it's definitely possible. I know we haven't really like talked much about like having like half weeks, like going 2 days into work and then going and then working from home. But I know my girlfriend, she's an interior designer, and I'm staying with her for now, and she works right beside me, and her company is thinking about like, do we even need an office at all? So there's definitely like, people out there who are thinking like, maybe this is a good thing. We realize we don't need an office and we can just work from home.
So I'm going to say, given that, would you be, I'm going to do this in 2 parts. Would you be happy going in 3 days a week for that inspiration and have that flexibility?
Yeah, definitely. I think I like working from home a little bit. I think, but I definitely need, I need people around me to get a little bit more motivated and a little bit inspired. Definitely. Yeah.
But would that be like a happy medium? Do you think you get a little bit of the benefits of both?
Definitely. Yeah. I think I also I'm an introvert basically, so I get my energy from, being by myself. But I still enjoy the company of others, and I still enjoy um, talking to other people about design and animation and learning new tools and all that stuff. So that is really necessary for me.
Of
So I
course.
think a happy medium of like maybe going 3 days a week into work would be very nice.
Yeah. What about you?
Yeah.
Well,
Well, my like roommate who I'm going to be moving in with, he's a producer right now, and he's been doing a 3-day week where like every other day he goes into the office. He's been doing that for a year or so now, and he says it's like one of the best things he's ever decided to do. He loves it. Um, Thinking of that, but then like in the context of school, I could see it having a lot of uses. Because I towards the end of senior year, I was having to do 2 lectures at a time versus just one,
mm-hmm.
and I realized when we went online, I had way more free time than I think I ever had like in school, just because when the lectures were given to us as like documents, it didn't take me 2.5 hours to read through. I could read it in like 30 minutes. So like that kind of stuff was great. However, the discussions for the class, I would have much rather, that would have been awesome to have in person,
Yeah.
because asking a question has a yes or no answer, and all 30 people have to respond like the same thing versus
There's that very ordered kind
yeah,
of rote.
it's super awkward compared to if you were in class, teacher asks a question, one person can answer it, and then everyone just be like, yep, that's correct.
Yeah.
So I feel like some combination of that would be super useful to like help free up time, like learn a little bit more self management, time management to go read those lectures, but then also having time to go into class and do like a round table talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I mean, the facilities are important. I'd like to be able to access laser printers or go in and work in the studio or, have time to interface with people in Monty without necessarily being structured into it all the time. And there are two parts to this. It's about your resources. So for me, I did office hours on Zoom, right? And I'd open up like 4 or 5 hours with 20-minute bookings. And I thought, I'm never not doing it this way again. Because the idea of me going in on a Friday to Monty and then waiting for people to turn up, and then what do? I've got a 20-minute break. It's awful. Whereas I was really productive with people, and they knew they had a time and they turn up. They didn't have to leave home necessarily. So suddenly office hours was just about us connecting rather than traveling to a space and doing this whole thing. And I thought, this is much better.
yeah.
And I've got a 40-minute break and I can do something here and then I can get back to the next person will chime in. And, I'm going to say if I was running a studio again, I would think about this process, because if I could rent 60% of the real estate and have 100% of the work happening, that's a big cost. Especially if you're in New York. And I think, interestingly, someone like Swarovski, who owns her own space, but it's not a big space. You can't have 40 people in there. And so, but as she expands, she's got this bigger pool of people working remotely, like Shaw or people like that who are sort of on call and will do some work and add in. If you all think about it, that makes a lot of sense to kind of build the mix, yeah? So, a few of you have spoken about people who may be a few years ahead of you. They've got kids or they've got family life. They like working remotely as a mix. It may be less so when you're young because you're like, I want to throw myself into this 100%. But, maybe it makes sense that. Do you guys feel this is something we could all adapt to a little bit in the future?
I mean, like
I
I
wanna-
had, sorry, you go, Anna.
Go ahead, Krista. Yeah.
Okay, well, I was like we had mentioned before about like this being a big transition period. Like I think before we were so dependent on that being in that physical space together all the time, and then now we were forced into this being dependent on the technological space, whereas now we see the ways that we can take the best of both and put them together. And like I think that would be like I would definitely be for having a 3-day work week, or like I think just more about like communication and of what each individual person would need and what would work best for them, and like make, because ultimately a lot of studios are just like, as long as we get the work done and we have like effective communication, that's like all they really want. And so I think like whatever works best for each individual person, and they communicate that, we'd be able to just, it would be make everyone happier overall and be more doable.
Anna, what were you?
I just wanted to say that I think this kind of transition, honestly, would be really beneficial to people who are entering an industry, because there's something to be said about how working from home kind of increases accessibility to these jobs. Granted that like these institutions provide internet and like the computer. If you have that, then you can reach more people with, say, like disabilities, or people who can't afford to live in the areas where these studios are. And I think that could be really helpful for people who are trying to enter into these industries as well, not just for people who have, you know, families and kids that they need to take care of at home.
There are a couple of people in the sort of general audience who've done remote work for different companies. I don't know if any of them are interested in talking about it, but like, you know, sort of some of these models which are people are working as intermediaries, like VidMob or things like that, where they're trying to. Has anyone got anything to sort of throw in on that? Because I think, I mean, I've talked to Shaw a lot about this, and I know he's doing work remotely for lots of companies, yeah, because he's got a full slate of external work, but he's in Savannah, but he's already established his reputation, I guess. But other people have come in and, you know, like to the marketplace, they're like intermediaries. They're trying to aggregate talent or young people. Has anyone got any experiences to share on some of those things? Is there a role for people to sort of broker talent, or to help effectively manage these virtual projects? No. Desmond, people can talk, can't they, from the audience? You're muted.
Sorry, you're talking about the audience?
Yeah.
Or like,
Yeah.
I mute them all.
Unmute them. That's
I
very
don't think. Wait, let me see. Mute. I'm not sure if I can.
I'm going to unmute Claire Abbey if she's there.
Oh, sorry, what was the question?
So Claire, people, have you worked with some of these intermediary people who want to broker, like VidMob, and people who want to broker virtual jobs, I guess, with, you know, they want to find talent and then find the work and then broker it out. What's that process?
Yeah, so sorry, yeah, so I mean, like, a lot of companies, you know, they are super okay. Oh, right, start my video. Hi. A lot of companies are really starting to realize that they can do more work from home. Like my company right now, before all of this, we were teleworking 2 days a week in order to save desk space and office space. And it worked really well for people because they could take less sick time, because they can like go to the doctor during their lunch hour instead of, you know, having to take a whole day off of work for that. Or they can like take care of their kid from home if their kid is sick. So it's a really, really good thing that I hope more places put to work. It's also, somebody was saying that it makes these jobs more accessible for people with disabilities. And I'm sorry, I know this wasn't the question, but this is something I've noticed that I want to bring up is there's a lot of hurdles in this industry for people with disabilities, because people like me, I can't do a job that doesn't offer healthcare because I have to be insured, because I have, you know, a lot of us have medications we need, a lot of us have things we need. And it's, so like there's some places where they're like, hey, you'll work for us for 3 months as a freelancer, and then we'll talk about offering you a full-time job. People like me wouldn't be able to take that, because that means those 3 months I would either like have to be on my parents' health insurance, which I'm getting close to the cutoff point for that. Right. Or I would have to get independent insurance, like Medicare, you know, stuff like that. And I can't afford that on a freelance salary. Right. And you know, it's just, there's a lot of hurdles with that. And I think that's something that needs to be discussed in this industry, is there's a lot of barriers that we don't realize are there.
That's a barrier in every industry. I'm sorry, but it's the largest disincentive to workplace mobility in the political economy. So yeah, I mean, I've been in a country with universal healthcare, and I've been in the United States, and I can tell you which one I'd rather be in and what the outcomes are. And I think you've all watched it happen. It's like when, you know, the space shuttle took off. It's this incredibly amazing technological thing, and then it just disintegrates into a ball of flames. You know, the US healthcare system seems to have slowly disintegrated and become very vulnerable in the last period of time, because, you know, the incentives are not there to make it the way it is. So it's a tough one. But for the individual, you're right. Healthcare is, I mean, for who does that play a big thing about flexibility for people? Just a show of hands. Like, anyone think about that? In your, you know, in your circumstances, is healthcare important for you?
Yeah.
It is. I mean, coming from Singapore, there's universal healthcare, and then coming to America, it's like, oh my God, I heard about these scary stories about paying thousands of dollars for something simple. So I'm so scared to go to the doctor or like be sick.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it always struck me when I came to the United States. There were these almost things like in Walgreens, there'd be like a sew your own leg on back kit. You know, like people seem to take, I'm joking, but they take responsibility for very large healthcare, you know, splints and things. It's like, got a broken bone, just lash it up at home. And it's like, really? Is that? And I feel people are doing that because they're just like, oh, you know, I'll just splint it. Doesn't feel too bad. Maybe it's broken. I don't know. I don't want to get an X-ray. So how does that work out for you, Peter, with, you know, freelancing? Is that a big pressure on you?
Yeah, I've had to pay for my own healthcare for a few years now, and it is a big expense, and
Yeah.
not a fan of it. And I actually had to get since I skateboard a lot, I've fractured my wrist many times, and I had to get like a MRI not too long ago, and that cost me, even with like copay, like $1,000, which was you know, kind of a kick in the gut when you're paying for everything yourself. But yeah, I know a lot of friends who are now looking at going freelance because a lot of their companies shut down during COVID, and that's, I think healthcare is the biggest thing they've been nervous about.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they all know they can get freelance jobs. They just look at the prices of it right now and are like, wow, that's like such a big cut out of your pay. But, you know, it's a thing we got to deal with for now, unless the system changes. So,
look,
hopefully.
and I'll say from the other point of view, it's almost an incentive for studios in some way if they can sustain a freelance pool without, you know, with having the right balance of accessibility and talent. It's attractive to pay the extra because you lose a lot of those costs on your books. You know, every person on your staff, every month you're paying for benefits for them. So that's a big an economic incentive as well. So I think these things are going to be in the background about how much flexibility we can incorporate in the next period of time. For people who went through this, like, this is a much more, I guess, touchy-feely question, but when did this really hit you that this period would be different? Like, you know, when did people go like, oh, okay, this isn't going to go away?
When they closed the skate parks. That's when it hit me.
Yeah.
Because everything else was just, all my roommates were just at the house again because they weren't going into the office. So that was like, all right, that's different. But when they closed the skate park on me, it's like, oh no, my one form of exercise is gone. I'm going to be in this room a lot. That's when it hit me.
Yeah. What about for people studying?
I think for me, like, there was a bunch of, like, the rumors that, like, SCAD was going to close down and make all of the next spring quarter online, like, in the weeks leading up to it, because we knew it was, like, serious, but not, like, that serious. And we're like, I don't know if that is even possible. So, like, but then when the email came out, I was talking with some people in Momi Love about how, like, that's such a weird memory of, like, walking through, like, Arnold when everybody kind of got that email. And I actually saw Will, like, And we had like this really weird moment of like, this is crazy and a lot is going to change. I think like that was a big shifting moment, but like even now, with the recent like email that SCAD had just sent out about this upcoming fall quarter about how things are going to change, I think it's also another like realization moment of like that this isn't going away anytime soon and that like things are going to be different for a while. But I do think that everyone is approaching what's changing now with a bit more like preparedness, and they kind of understand a bit more about what needs to be done and how we can be more productive and like positive about everything, because I think it was very sudden, like earlier this year, and now we've kind of had some time to like get used to things, and I think it's going to be a bit more streamlined and positive this time around.
I'm going to reflect, and this is just a personal reflection, but in terms of lifetime, most of your generation, as it were, and I get to say that because I'm like your entire lifetime ahead of you plus a bit, you know, so I've got sort of a longer, you know, I remember the Beatles when they were, you know, the most famous band in the world. So given all of that shift, you've had a fairly calm historical period, you know, without these kind of major disruptions. I mean, no, really, there's been no World War. Everything's happened kind of remotely. You know, people say something like the war in Afghanistan, but it doesn't really impact on you. You know, no one's demonstrating in the street. There's not this kind of sense of social upheaval. It seems like this year, everything's kind of, everyone's gone, whoa. Is it fair to say that this seems like a major event for all of you, or it's a little bit unprecedented in your experience of things?
2020 has been a major event the whole year.
Yeah.
It's been crazy. And I don't think I've lived through many things in my life like this, of course. And I know Claire mentioned like 9/11 in the chat, but I was a baby when that happened. I barely remember that. I do remember watching those videos on YouTube and stuff, but I don't think anything of this proportion has happened in my lifetime, and this is the first time, and it's definitely very new and weird, but yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to place when the last economic crash happened, like the housing bubble burst. You know, Lehman Brothers went out. You guys some of you would have been in middle school. You know, it's not like you're going like, oh, there's a recession. That's because I came to the United States many years after that period, and people were still in deep shock. I could feel it when I came here. I was like, wow, this country's been devastated by that whole event. And it probably 3 years after it had time to ease off. So, you know, I think this is a big deal, and it's not over. How do you feel in terms of like, Krista, you're talking about adaptability, that it gives you some new tools and new approaches. Do you feel you're poised now to go through this next set of circumstances, whatever they may be, or you've got a better handle on what could happen, or at least how to respond?
I think like I kind of had a rough like adjustment to all of this, or like we were talking about like our type of personalities and like who has really embraced this type of like this way of working and who it's been kind of hard for. And I feel like I'm way more comfortable with people in person, and like it was really hard for me this in the spring quarter trying to learn that way and not having people around me to like be inspired by and like learn from. So I think be like this summer working with Block and Tackle and having like that whole like kind of rough quarter I think under my belt, I'm a bit more prepared for what it'll be like. I'm not saying that like I'll be able to handle it perfectly or that, you know, there's not going to be any issues now, but I think like I'm a bit more mentally like prepared for it, in not necessarily like in a more structured way, or I have this like plan of what's going to happen, but I feel a bit more positive about like being able to talk to like people about and knowing that everybody's going through the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Any other thoughts on that for people? Just getting, I mean, Will, maybe you're in that position where you've gone one foot in the industry, one foot in finishing off your senior year. Do you feel you can deal with this next part of the process?
I feel like our generation, generally speaking, is one that's very ready to mobilize. And we've seen a lot of social change within our lives. And at least from my perspective, I've only ever lived in a world where my country was at war. Like referencing 9/11, like before that, I wasn't really, as a kid, I wasn't really conscious of what was happening. But ever since then, I've always lived in a world where, we were in war and people suffer from debt from healthcare and natural disasters. So I think also all of that on top of, the internet letting us talk to other people, hearing out like other experiences, we know that there are other things that we can do, and we know that other methods of whatever, we're considering can be successful. It's not just what we're experiencing now. So I think, at least for me in my, general age range, like we're ready to try something new because even though we haven't experienced it, we know that at least trying is better than, suffering in what we've been experiencing.
Yeah, I feel like to add to that, like how kind of like crazy this year has been, it feels like everything has been leading up to this year, not just that it happened out of nowhere. Like there's a lot that has been going on and has been wrong for so long that this year is now just like, I think, yeah, our generation, even though a lot of people, it's still an adjustment period, like we're more prepared and like ready for how kind of crazy things, and we're ready for that type of change that Anna's talking about.
Interesting. I mean, okay, given that generally, do people here on the panels feel like a little bit more ready for whatever it throws at you in the next period? Peter, you're probably the least helpful person here because that's your natural state, right?
Yeah, I wasn't totally sure. I mean, I feel like, I've obviously like saved money in case of a huge economic downturn and no one has budgets to advertise anything.
Yeah.
And that's always a fear whenever people talk about the economy taking a downturn and like there being a bunch of like just a lot of unrest in the world is, that's generally our industry is going to take a hit if that's happening. And like, we aren't really providing an essential service of any sort. So I feel like it's very easy for our work to disappear. So as a freelancer, I'm always anxious about that. But
that will always be with you though.
Yeah, even when the economy's good.
For 20 years consistently, and they're just crapping themselves that in the next month they won't have work.
Yeah, because then as you get older,
when are you always busy? Always. It's like, but in a month you're not going to have work after 20 years. So like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I have it right now. I have holds for next month, but I'm still nervous that I'm like something's going to come up and then I'm going to end up not working at all. But that's why I have like 5 side projects, so I can just say, all right, I'll focus on those, take my mind off of it, and when stuff comes in, it'll come in. And so far I've stayed busy. So, but yeah, it's definitely like a interesting time to be freelancing and not have like a company looking out for you, no like severance if you get let go or something like that. Yeah, but I'm just taking it as it comes, and so far I've been doing okay. So
yeah, no, it's a little bit of a life lesson in lots of ways. I mean, look, I'm not saying this in terms of like personal distance from the thing, but I feel shaken up by it. I feel shaken up by the whole year. I think I'm suffering more kind of mental stress going forward it's like, oh, what again? Like everything seems unresolved in terms of the pandemic is not under control. The numbers are worse. People went with shutting down the economy. They're like, oh, we'll all die because there'll be no economic activity. Let's open it up. And it's like, all these things are like pressure points in the next 6 months. Like whatever happens is going to happen in 6 months. You know, and I'm going to say like climate change is really one of those things where everyone's like, yeah, that's a great idea. I'm going to take a brown bag to Whole Foods or something, or, you know, like I support it, but it's sufficiently distant that you know, there may be some more hurricane activity, but it's not going to happen in November. Whereas, I don't know, do you guys feel like a little bit out of this, that the level of urgency is greater now? I mean, from that point of view, like Peter, you're really, you know, immediately affected by this in the sense of I may stop working.
Yeah.
You know, my horizon for work is fairly narrow.
Yeah. Yeah, it is like a stress. And luckily there has been a lot of like digital content stuff coming up. So like I've also like lost 5 jobs recently, which were all for musicians for live tour visuals. And
Yeah.
it was like a long back and forth on, well, I've done half of the video already. Are they going to pay me for that half, or do I need to find another musician to buy it? And, you know, there's definitely been some turmoil, but
Did they pay you?
well, we've essentially figured out other artists that are under their label that it works for. And I mean, they never pay as well as like the corporate clients, so it's not as bad as like a car company bailing on you. You know, it's like, you know, it's basically like 2 months of rent kind of maybe disappearing. So I usually have to try and work with them. But a lot of the musicians also, I mean, their managers or like VJs are in the same industry as us, so they understand the struggle we go through. So they don't really leave you, or at least the ones I've worked with have been really good about setting up, you know, making sure you're compensated. But yeah, it has been a very interesting time to be an artist with so much turmoil going on, because even just like sharing your work online, it feels strange to put your own work out there because it feels like it's distracting from the movement that's happening right now, or like all the information that's out there that is infinitely more important than our work. So I feel like that's been a huge shift for me. Is I've never felt uncomfortable about putting my work online, but now I always second guess it, like, oh, is this taking away space online for something that is more important than my work or like what I'm doing? And so it's yeah, that for me has been one of the biggest shifts right now, is reconsidering the significance of my work and like what I'm doing with my life in terms of my personal work. Like, what meaning does it have? Because I'm always doing personal work for me and stuff that feels like very important to me. Like, I'm always thinking about like cyber surveillance and stuff like that. So those topics are very important to me. But then there are so many things coming up now that I feel like I should be involved in. And that's been a big struggle. And I mean, maybe all of you have gone through the same thing on like feeling like you want to be involved and have your art like pertain to like what's happening now, but maybe feeling like a little off when you have a new project come out. It's like, oh, do I post this or do I just wait until like the proper time? When is the proper time? You know, has anyone else been experiencing that?
Yeah, I myself have not even done that much personal work lately. I think the world is such in a negative state right now that like the motivation is barely there. And then when I do make personal work, again, I have that same feeling. I'm uncomfortable posting it online because I don't know if it's going to distract from all the information that's out there, especially during this time. So yeah, shift that too.
Yeah, I agree with Marcelo. It's like I have so much stuff to share. You know, I have my YouTube tutorials or like, you know, some news, but it's like, no, everyone's like trying to fight for social causes. So I felt like there's a need for me, an obligation for me to kind of contribute as a designer and artist. Before I continue, I'd like to just share with you guys that there's only 15 minutes left. So if you have any questions, please share on the group chat and I can unmute you, show your video. So yeah, just type in a group chat.
Mishi.
I feel like the nature of what we do sometimes is either very like fun or like, at least for me, I like, making like cute stuff. So making sure that it's not like performative or like taking away from the seriousness of any of these topics that, finally people are feeling comfortable talking about on the internet, is definitely, something that's in my mind when I'm creating work either for myself or thinking about work that I've made in the past. Like, would it be relevant to share it now, or should I just, keep it to myself?
Yeah. I think the thing is too with personal work, and this is like thinking to one of I have a friend, he's actually Marcel's roommate. He has like an entire he has books filled with artwork that he's made that's completely just for himself. And I've asked him before, like, hey, we should make an Instagram account and like post this stuff. Like, this is amazing. And he was like, why would I do that? He's like, this is like personal work. This is for me. Like, personal work does not mean it has to be shared. I think that's kind of like a mentality I've been thinking about lately, is like, just because you make something, it doesn't have to be shared to the world. And especially with everything that's going on right now, like, it's not really a hard ask to be like, hey, I'm just going to keep this. This is not important right now, what's going on. I think that's something that like all of us have been feeling, but it's also just like, it's okay to make stuff and not share it too. Like, that's perfectly normal. I feel like with social media,
that should be the first place you start.
Yeah.
Like, the first position is you make it because you love making it and you want to make something, and I'll say this in the general terms, not in pictorial, but beautiful. You want to bring something into the world which you care about. But I mean, you care, and the process of creation is important, but too much of our world is directed towards a sort of exteriority, a kind of narcissism, and we've been produced as this series of individuals who are largely competitive on some level. Like, look at me, and collectivism is mostly cast in a really bad light. Being able to do things as groups together in order to feel solidarity with other people. Most of our social structures serve to bifurcate that and move us apart from each other. And, it's a good time to think, what's the ethical framework I work in? And by ethics, I don't mean morals. I don't mean like what you want to do or tell someone to do based on rules, but how you are accountable to yourself for analyzing the world around you. And, work is part of that, and it can be very private. I think that's, it's with every thing tells us, put it on Instagram, build your market, it's like you're on sale all the time. Maybe not,
I think it's really important to like ask yourself why you're making something, because I think now sometimes we feel the obligation of like, oh, do I have to say something because I have like an Instagram, or like because I haven't posted in a while and this thing is happening in the world right now, so I should say something about it? Or like, it's like, are you saying something because you actually have something important to say, or are you saying something because you feel like you should just say something? It's just like making sure that there's an important message behind what you're saying, and that it will have like a positive impact, whether that's on like your friends who are maybe feeling like abandoned or alone, and you want to make sure that they have that support, or like, I don't know, I just think there needs to be a clear like reason why people are doing something, and not just because you can.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about how that connectivity, that human connectivity, is like really important. That's something all of these mediums give us. Like, I like Facebook because I can see what people who I've spent my whole life with in Australia are doing, and I just get reminded of them. But I hate the sort of comment sections where everyone starts trying to shout each other down about their politics of like wearing a mask or something like that. It's like, is this weird thing again. This is sorry, but this whole idea of individualism. Everyone's told you get to say what you want and say it from the soapbox, because if you can say it, it's somehow right. So, I see people like saying, don't wear a mask because, I'm free and all this sort of stuff. Sorry, Hong Kong have 7.5 million people who live on top of each other that will wear masks at the drop of a hat, and suddenly they've had 7 deaths or 10 deaths and 1,100 cases in that city. Like, I'm going to go with the masks just based on nothing else than Hong Kong's reasonably good evidence to me that works, But it's weird because everything becomes here this thing of like, oh, say everything's right. And some of it's not personal, it's about these weird abstract ideas. So I think your thing about personal connectivity and caring for each other is super important, because maybe that's something we miss a little bit, just being able to walk past someone in Monty and say, how you doing? And you know what I mean? Those little moments we give away for nothing that are really there. But it's a big time to reflect on, where we're, none of these things that are happening at the moment, the different processes, they're not out of the blue. Political violence in the normal course of everyday life doesn't just emerge spontaneously. It's enabled by structures which are very deep and ways which people see themselves, which are very long-standing. So I think it's good for us to reflect as a group on that, as people together. That's, to me, it's almost like we put that off because we're busy doing our freaking Instagram. You know what I mean? Rather than thinking about what our responsibilities are to each other. So, maybe it's the time to reflect on some of those things.
John, Michelle, and Stephen have something to share.
Hi. I agree. I feel like our whole entire United States has shifted into like an introspection time, and everybody's actually questioning why they're doing something and why they're putting an effort into things. But I also believe that we've lost a sense of community because we've all gone into our own spaces behind our own computer screens, and we're like voicing our individual opinions. And I think the greatest thing I've lost is a sense of community, because I no longer have access to like a plethora of friends. I have to be really selective with who you're hanging out with, because you don't want us to like spread the disease. And I don't know, I think it's just been a time where everybody has really become polarized and has sided with different things instead of like uniting and saying we're in this together, because it's really easy just to hop on the computer and step away and say what you want to say and not see the effects.
So, I mean, that's a great observation, that it's exacerbated a little bit by the current conditions.
Yeah, but I think the good positive is the introspection, because so many of my friends never stop to actually question what they're doing. And I kind of felt like when I graduated, there was a like big rat race to just enter the, I don't know, revolving door of just like making money and putting things out in the world and not actually questioning what you're doing and who you are and if it makes you happy. And personally, I've kind of have been evaluating that myself, and I don't think that we give our students and our youth enough time to like really figure out what you want to do. There's just so much pressure to make money and become something before you even know who you want to be.
Yeah. Well, we could talk a lot about that, but it's outside the scope. Yeah, but I mean, I think it's interesting. Everyone's desperate to leave school and start paying off. They're in debt the minute they leave school. And they enter school having been processed by the school system to enter college. And then the week they finish college, they need to start working. And, like I traveled around Asia for like a year when I finished college, because it was like, I want to go to Tibet. So I did, but like no one in the US does that. So I don't know. I think one of the things is it's very hard to get that sense of being in time in our culture. And I mean, to just be quiet or to have time stretch out and to not give you a thing to do. And that's maybe what you're talking about, that's come back into people's lives a little bit, so you can actually be introspective.
Mm-hmm.
And Christopher,
yeah, we're all about productivity and like everybody's wondering like, what have you been up to? What are you doing? Like,
I didn't do a bunch of Instagram posts. I just sat and thought. Or, Will, I made something beautiful as a form of dialogue with myself. I don't know. I don't think they're bad things to think about for all of us, you know, to come back to it.
And also to like pick up new hobbies that you don't normally get to do now that you have all this free time. Hobbies that aren't art related.
Steven, you want to share something?
Honestly, like one thing that I noticed, that I used to think that like I work better at home, but then like since actually this is like, I guess it's like the reverse of what a lot of you guys think, where now that I was in isolation, I noticed that it's a lot harder for me to focus. And also like I feel like, especially because I did a SCAD Pro, and I noticed that like normally when you're in like a group setting, it's a lot easier to like talk to people and just go like, hey, I have a suggestion or whatever. But when you're in a Zoom call, all of a sudden it's like you're muted, and then people tend to be a lot shyer. So I feel like a lot of ideas and like, I guess like progress is slower, especially when you're working on projects, because like a lot of people, like some people, I guess like if the group is too big, no one speaks. But when we moved into like the smaller calls, that's when like people started to be more open to talking and all that. So I guess like, so I feel like that was one thing that I missed about, especially like when you're like working online from home and everything. It's like you miss like the sense of, you feel like, I guess like my voice is a little bit lost, you know, because like by default it's like everyone is muted, so forth. And so that's one thing that I kind of missed about working in like on ground, I guess. It's a lot harder to talk to people. It's a lot harder to interact and develop like what you guys were talking about, like having a sense of community, you know, because like you're literally just at the end of the day, you're kind of just talking to the screen, you know, and and yeah, so it's just really hard to like, at least like developing like a friendship with like the people that you work with, you know.
Does it feel that way to you, Will?
Yeah, I definitely can see that. Like, I think it has to do with kind of what I was mentioning earlier in class, like the one-on-one teacher versus having to listen to every single person one at a time present their project and listen to every conversation. It's like you can't really have there's no more side conversations going on anymore. It's all like when you talk, the entire classroom then has your undivided attention. So someone like me, who I can do well in like medium-sized groups, but then when I have like 30 eyes on me when I speak, like it makes me not want to, you know, contribute as much versus just like texting someone, you know, what's going on.
I think there's something about like the camaraderie of like working with other people, even if it's on different projects, that is so motivating. And like even being able to sit next to a friend and help them with whatever they're working on can get your brain thinking about what you need to be doing. And, you know, that's just something that you can't replicate when you're on even like a video call.
I mean, I think some of this speaks to the idea of how we build that mix. You know, maybe we take some of the strengths out of this period and go, you know what, that wasn't so bad, or that worked, or that was effective, or that gave me more time to have a doctor's appointment at lunchtime, or to manage my time on a productivity basis rather than a presence basis part of the time, 2 days a week, 3 days a week. But I need that time with people. I need that little community, that space, those other times. Would that be a fair thing to say, that you maybe think like some things are good, some things you want to go back to a better mix? I mean, I feel like I would love to 50-50 it.
Yeah, John, definitely a mix would be good, but unfortunately we can't discuss anymore because
No.
we're out of time. So let's just close this webinar. Thank you all for attending this webinar, and I also like to thank the panelists, Peter, Crystal, Anna, Marcelo, Will, and Michelle, Stephen, and Claire, and as well as Professor John Colette. Thank you all for contributing. I very much appreciate it. And yeah, I will upload the recording onto YouTube and post it on Mommy Love Facebook group.
Cool.
And
Thank you.
thanks for putting it together, Desmond. I'm going to send you a little applause.
Thank you very much.
Approval cycle.
Yeah, it was fun. I'm glad it turned out well. I wasn't really sure what I was doing, but hey, I got you guys.
It was fun. It was fun.
Yeah. And I think one of the important things is there are experiences that we all have. We can see some of us in school, some of us making that rapid transition, some of us out in the workplace for a while, going remotely. There's little bits of wisdom from everyone, and little bits. It's nice for you all to look across to other people's experience and think, okay, this is okay. It's not, the turmoil that happens for us individually is not. It's there for everyone, but it's not absolute. Do you know what I mean? And that something about the community of people is really important. And I think to some extent we can still have a little bit of that, even in this.
I feel like we'll definitely adapt to any situation, because like at some point it's like we're just gonna go like, well, this is the situation that we're left with, being like something else will come up, and we'll improvise and we'll adapt, and then the workspace, the workflow, the community will change and adapt. It's like, who knows? Like everything is constantly changing, evolving.
Yeah, for sure. Nature of life. Thank you, Desmond.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Good to see you guys. I'll let you guys get back to your day. Thank you for taking your time.
Yeah.
And I'll talk to you guys soon again.
Deliver that
Thank you for this.
All right, bye everybody.
Bye, guys.
See you guys.
Take care.